Hey, Chris here, and I wanted to share a response to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's report on climate change that came out this week. Before I get started, I want to say I've been knocked off course by some personal life stuff in the last couple of weeks, and so I apologize for being out of the loop for a little bit. I plan to share some substantial new material next week. Secondly, I want to start off by saying climate change is, of course, not our only big environmental problem. And when you look at all of today's environmental crises and parallel and interlaced and interlocked social crises, I think now the cause is clear. It's the system of wealth hierarchy that humans have used in the developed world to organize ourselves for the past hundreds or even thousands of years. And this system of winners and losers, as determined by physical dominance and material wealth dominance, that is causing us to, without realizing it, destroy the life support system of our planet. And we're really close to going past the point of repair now. It's easy for me to talk about this idea of wealth hierarchy and dominance and so forth. I'm a middle-aged white guy who's never known the trauma of indigenous rights abuse and annihilation, of racism, of misogyny, of poverty. I am literally white privilege. But I'll tell you, I think the most important response to all of these social and environmental distresses and catastrophes is for those of us in the developed world to transition rapidly into becoming a biospherically literate society. In other words, into living in the life support system paradigm. This leads to a greater social solution than simply solving climate change or pursuing any single technological issue or solution or any social issue, because the life support system paradigm is not only inclusive of reality, literally, but also the life support system paradigm is effectively not a system of hierarchy. So I want to add that because of something I saw this morning, that this is what I want for biointegrity. I want to help humans, especially wealth holders in the developed world, become biospherically literate. And furthermore, in terms of the solution I want to see, I want the world's wealth holders to come together to devote a small portion of their excess wealth to rescuing Earth's biospheric integrity and converting the most destructive actors in our economy to regenerative life support system stewardship. And how much will that cost? I don't know, but I'm guessing maybe $5 trillion. And that may sound incredibly large, but if you look at just the top 100 wealthiest corporations in the world and all of the billionaires and their net worths, and take 5% of all of that, which you could call excess wealth, that's about $5 trillion. They're worth about $100 trillion right now. So let me break down what I'm talking about when I say living in the life support system paradigm before I get into the IPCC report. I have already been told by one very senior conservation biologist who I greatly respect that no one knows what biospheric reality means or what it is. So, okay, fine, let's do some shorthand on that. Living in biospheric reality is about thinking historically on how Earth's biosphere, which is comprised of all of Earth's biodiversity, developed over the last several billion years to evolve into the superstructure of life that makes life, including us. And we'll call this superstructure, or this great biological matrix that is our life support system, we'll call it the wilderness continuum. It extends from below the oceans to the top of the atmosphere. The wilderness continuum built itself long before any humans were present on Earth. So let's envision our modern built world, industrial, technological, economic way of living as evolving now beyond senseless destruction of the superstructure or the wilderness continuum into a way of life that protects biosphere Earth's organ-like systems, also called ecosystems and vital organ ecosystems, and protects them through globally strategic conservation and restoration, and through integration of wilderness back into the places we live and work. Another way of visualizing what I mean by biospheric reality is if you think about Earth's biosphere, back when the United States formed and there were less than 1 billion people on our planet, it's pretty easy to imagine a mostly connected living wilderness continuum that covered the entire planet. Today we have a mostly destroyed and fragmented wilderness continuum. So biospheric reality now demands that we recognize the fragmentation of Earth's life support system's viability due to this destruction of ecosystems and biodiversity that's occurred particularly since 1970, as global population has ballooned from less than 4 billion people to now nearly 8 billion people. And I'll talk about this more in future content. Now, here's why living in the life support system paradigm or in biospheric reality is our number one social solution. I'm going to give you 5 big, simple reasons. Number one, we all live here on this planet. Coexistence is our only solution, and diversity is reality. But number two, biospheric reality is not a paradigm of dominance through physical coercion or wealth building, material wealth dominance. Consider the example of large trees, which precede our economic way of life today by hundreds of millions of years. Large trees don't lord over smaller vegetation, and they don't judge other vegetation for being different. And whether you're on land or in water, the largest species, the largest apex predators, they don't build kingdoms, they coexist. They take what they need, and in the process, they maintain the greater ecosystem. This in turn maintains the balance of the great life support system, the wilderness continuum. A fourth reason why this is a social solution is that if you take the indigenous wisdom, particularly I'm thinking of my favorite indigenous philosopher and poet, John Trudell, he tells us, and I'm going to paraphrase him here, that all indigenous people resisted Christianity around the world, not because they were against religion or Christianity per se, but because they knew that a man in the sky lording over everything was fundamentally unrealistic. And as Trudell says, I'm again paraphrasing, we didn't have misogyny. We knew you needed both male and female to continue the species. We respected women and men equally. So just think about that. Diversity is reality. The fifth reason I'll give is that in order to conquer what's causing our collapse today, we do truly need every human being to be a contributor to rescuing, restoring, and living in harmony with the biosphere, with our life support system. So each of us, as biological contributors to the biosphere, has a lifelong role to play here on Earth. And that would be true on any planet. So back to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, and their new report that came out on Monday. This report is dire, and yet I don't think it's dire enough, and I have some critiques I'm going to share. The report calls for immediate reductions in fossil fuel emissions at global scale. We already knew that. It says we have 4 years left to stop the increase of emissions. They hadn't said that before, so that's good, strong language. I believe, however, we have 0 years. We need to work faster than within 4 years. I mean, if you look at the U.S. Drought Monitor, which you can look up on Google, or the Global Drought Monitor, if you look at the temperatures in Siberia today, or the never-before-seen wildfires that are just massively taking out forests in Turkey and in Greece and in Canada and in other regions of the planet that have never had catastrophic fires, I believe, in all of human history. If you look at the snowpocalypse in Texas a few months ago, the rate of melting that's happening at the poles, if you look at the incredible storms we've had, the floods and the hurricanes, it is abundantly clear the climate system is already broken. And so I think the politicization of climate science continues to make the climate science community a little late to the game and soft in terms of how they clarify the severity of this moment that we're in. I'm not trying to be too critical. I recognize that these governmental agencies are in a culture of political conflict. They are rife with inner conflict. I mean, if you look at the CDC and how they have handled our COVID-19 problem, it's been really hard to know how to respond to COVID-19. So it is very much up to us all to look more realistically at the data and the evidence in terms of what's happening with climate change and how to respond. Another aspect of the report that's significant and new is that they say we'll be at the 1.5 degrees Celsius warming threshold within 20 years if we don't stop the emissions growth by 2025. However, I think based on the science and the evidence, and by science I mean studies I can cite, the evidence of extreme events since 2011, it is painfully obvious that even without 1.5 degrees Celsius, we are already living in this catastrophe. The events that we're seeing now at 1.1 degrees Celsius warming are really pretty close to what we were trying to avoid with 2 degrees Celsius warming. A quarter of the United States is in extreme drought and has been since May. We're now only in early mid-August. We've got 3-4 more months of drought to go for California. Most of California and the west of the United States is in extreme drought now. It's over 60 million people's lives are threatened by this. Certainly the economy is affected by this. So even trying to avoid 1.5 degrees Celsius, I don't think is a good enough goal. Let's think more realistically about what's happening and how to respond. And secondly, we're going to reach 1.5 degrees Celsius. It seems inevitable. There's an inertia to climate change, even if we stop the emissions within 4 years. So we have to think and act accordingly. We have to stop treating these issues like they're too depressing or like they're a monster under the bed that's going to go away if we ignore it. And what I think we should be doing, what that thinking and acting accordingly should be, is prioritizing biospheric integrity and biospheric reality. I'm going to post more on that next week. Here are 15 summary points that I've gathered from the summaries I've seen on the IPCC report so far. It's a 4,000-page report, so I haven't read it yet. But these points are coming from various reliable sources, including the IPCC itself. The first point is that they're proud to unveil the cover art on their new report. Second point is that the changes that are happening on Earth are, quote, now widespread, rapid, and intensifying. I don't think anyone would question that based on what's happening now this summer. Third big point is that greenhouse gas concentrations are still increasing year on year, and they're increasing fast. The total concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, in particular carbon dioxide, is currently the highest it's been in at least 2 million years. Humans like us have been around for about 300,000 years, and of course our civilization has really been in place, you could say, for a couple of hundred years. So this is major change that we have yet to respond appropriately to. I want to say about that the only way to reduce emissions out of the atmosphere, it seems, is to restore lush, biodiverse ecosystems. This is the most scalable tool we have to reverse greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. Number 4, the IPCC is still downplaying the severity of the current losses of life on our planet and how that affects the ability of the life support system to continue. The life support system is made of life. So they're not talking about what really happens with deforestation, ocean deoxygenation, ocean acidification, forest fires, drought, and etc. Number 5, they say the warming is not going to stop in future decades, and extreme weather increases with increased warming. So again, there's inertia here. The weather is going to get worse. The best way to defend against the weather and the best way to reduce the frequency and intensity of the weather is to rebuild ecosystems. Number 6, the good news is if we stop the emissions, which we can do by stopping the warming, it's likely that by the end of the century we'll see the planetary temperature begin to cool. Number 7, it is, according to the IPCC, now considered indisputable that humans are causing climate change. Quote, almost all observed warming is human caused. Number 8, climate change manifests itself in different ways, they say. I think that's pretty obvious, and in different regions of the world at different times of the year, depending on different conditions. Number 9, more warming will bring heavier rain events. So this means we need to buffer up, again, ecosystems. The idea of ecosystem sponge that I've presented here in the past, this is the only way to not only absorb more carbon, but to also manage and take advantage of the heavier rainfall events. The greater the density of soil and vegetation, the more moisture it can hold, which not only prevents flood damage, but increases the ability of the ecosystem to hold that soak for a long period of time. And in holding the soakage, it can continue the irrigation of the life there, which creates the productivity that we need to survive. Buildings and pavements are no good in flooding events, and our reservoirs don't really help us either with this increased rain problem, because they have a sort of physical capacity that is sort of equivalent to how much water a bathtub can hold, whereas healthy soils and vegetation can expand in a sponge-like fashion to do incredible things. and reduce flood damage, and again, make life, or you could say make lemonade out of lemons, but make life out of floods. Number 10, there is an interactive atlas tool now with this new IPCC report, which is kind of cool. It's also kind of terrifying. It shows you what their science predicts for various levels of warming in your exact region of the planet, how the weather will respond. Number 11, the climate changes to the planet's ice and oceans that are happening now and that are intensifying are irreversible in our lifetimes. So that's yet another reason to act as fast as we possibly can to stop the warming. Number 12, the rates of change that are happening today are effectively exponential relative to rates of change just 50 years ago. Number 13, we can slow these changes by slowing emissions or stopping emissions or removing emissions out of the atmosphere. They say, quote, "It is possible to limit warming in future decades." And again, the best way to do this is by rebuilding ecosystems that absorb both carbon and moisture as they build life back onto the planet. Number 14, the relationship between emissions and warming in the atmosphere is nearly linear. They show these graphs that as carbon dioxide emissions go up, the temperature seems to go up in an almost parallel fashion. So let's look to stop the carbon dioxide emissions as fast as we can. Vegetation, again, is our most scalable resource there. Number 15, they're still not crediting, the IPCC is still not crediting the most scalable resource, the vital organ ecosystems of our planet. This is primarily tropical forests as the most effective way to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. They have incredibly large carbon dioxide absorption capacity. I've shown many times over the years that the tropical forest system, particularly the rainforest system, it can go from 0 trees to closed canopy within as few as 5 years, with a little bit of help from humanity to restart the forest system. This is because of the location of tropical rainforests on the planet, the fact that it's warm and moist there, and they will pull the moisture towards them out of the atmosphere as they grow and increase these benevolent nurturing cycles. So, in short, this new report, it seems, just really confirms what we already knew, that there's no new findings, but that the UN and the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, this body of scientists from 195 countries, which is certainly a remarkable and impressive, important feat, that they are using stronger language now. They are taking ownership of the climate change problem. And that's, to say the very least, that's meaningful. The bottom line is, that's emphasized by this report, is that we don't want any more warming. Unfortunately, the IPCC still seems to be leaving out ecosystems as the primary and most important solution to the climate crisis. So that omission, combined with the soft voice, soft balling of the effects on the life support system that these climate catastrophes are causing, and the description of the catastrophes themselves that we're seeing on our news every single day right now, this makes me think that these folks, that these professionals, that they're too beholden to their funders, to the wealth holders on our planet. So I think the solution here is not to criticize the scientists. They're doing the best they can, but to wake up the wealth holders, to put them in a mindset where they want to know how severe the situation is and how best to respond. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning, climate change is not our only problem environmentally. It's not the only thing that will sink us, and biospheric destruction is what we're trying to avoid by stopping climate change. The recent growth of human beings on our planet, the way we've done it through the economy, this is causing biospheric destruction. We've destroyed about 70% of the total wildlife on our planet since 1970. We are in crisis there already. This is why I think that it's time for biointegrity, and everyone involved in the project to continue humanity should call for paradigm change in the way we think about life and how we live. And I also think that means calling for investment from the top 0.1% of wealth holders, calling on them to rescue the biophysical life support system, the literal living infrastructure, the literal wilderness continuum, the kinds of things you see behind me in the picture here, and to advance our economy out of its hundreds of years old paradigm, which is self-destructive now with so many people and so many machines and so many things that have nothing to do with biospheric reality. Biointegrity's job is to invigorate this conversation about the biosphere into the public sphere, and I want you to help me with that. And I want to say one last thing two last things. I'm going to attach a video onto the end of this that is perhaps scientifically foolish to share. It's not based on detailed research. I'm not a scientist. I'm a researcher who compiles science to try to put it in everyday language. And I have, however, been conducting experiments. I've done about a dozen experiments over the last year of irrigating the vegetation and the trees and the air to recreate an effect that happens in the Amazon naturally in the rainforests, where they send not only through transpiration moisture into the clouds up to more than a half a mile into the sky, but also aerosols that tell the clouds to take their vapor, what you see in the white cloud, and turn it into moisture and release it as liquid. I've had about a 50% success rate in these dozen experiments, and this morning when I did it, I'm currently dog sitting at a friend's place in central Texas. It turned the clouds gray, and it didn't cause rain, but it caused cool breezes, and it cooled down the whole area, the whole multi-block area. If we were in Manhattan, it'd be about 4 city blocks long within half an hour, and that lasted for about an hour this morning. So I'll put that minute-long video at the end here. All of that, perhaps not so professionally wise for me to share at this moment stuff, is based on real science, and I'm sharing it because we're in real crisis. I'm worried about my friends in California. I'm worried about Utah and Oregon. Again, if you go to Google and look up the global drought monitor, you'll see that it's a quarter of the United States that's in extreme drought. It's more than a quarter of the total planet that's in extreme drought right now, and this is causing wildfires and extreme losses in every regard. So I'm sharing this now. Who knows where that conversation may go. And the second thing I want to say is that there are clear paradigms that we can follow. We don't have to invent this new paradigm. It's important to recognize that indigenous people on Earth today, in the tropics in particular, already are protecting 80% of global biodiversity and probably around 2/3 of globally stored carbon and the most productive ecosystems on the planet. So those people are our life support system guardians today. And furthermore, that this paradigm of indigenous living, where the laws of creation, or the laws of the creator, as Chief Johnny Jackson calls them, that these are the values of continuation. And these values that are real values, these are not based on some sort of woo-woo kind of imagined relationship with the life support system. This is based on understanding the idea of living in balance. It is time to utilize the wealth of the modern society to transition the modern society into living in balance with its life support system. So with that said, this is how I think we need to respond first and foremost. There are many more reasons than I've shared here, but to the climate challenge, this is how we need to respond. I promise to have a draft next week to share with you on the paper called The Value of Biosphere Earth. It will include a summary of some of the ways that restoring the biosphere restores components of our climate system. I hope you'll comment on it. I hope you'll help me develop that paper over the next month or so into something that I will put out to the rest of the world. And let's do this. Let's change the world. So thank you for watching. Take good care. I will see you in about a week. This is so amazing. So this is the street right in front of Julie's house. Okay. Over here is the house across the street. This is what across the street looks like. That's 180 back up the street. Now I'll go back to looking down the street, and this is over Julie's house. And then back down the street, the 180. Julie's house is right here. There's the clouds right above where I just watered. And then they spread, you know.